So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our July webinar on strategic questions to be asked and answered by non-profits. Let me tell you a little bit about us. We are EM Solutions, and we provide strategic consulting, coaching, accompaniment, and advisory to both the businesses and the non-profit sector, with a special focus on that keyword sustainability and funding diversification, innovative income generation development. And we got a number of those programs that we were just speaking about, our gym corners and our agri ambassadors and our entrepreneur launch academy and our business simulation game are all now on the market and available to download information from our website, as well as for implementation into your organization. So if you're keen to look at some form of income, then give us a shout and we'll be able to do that. So Michelle comes from an interesting history. She grew up in Cape Town and still lives in Cape Town. In fact, I think she still lives within stone's throwing distance place of where she grew up and the school she went to and the university she went to. And she did a BCom in information systems at UCT and has worked in the non-profit sector for like 304 years, gathering a huge amount of experience in the financial and strategy sectors of non-profits. Michelle's happy places are a number of things. Firstly, with family, and secondly, with an Excel spreadsheet, and thirdly, with customers having good discussions. So those are her happy places. And then she likes to bounce all that information off her mother on a regular basis to get good balance and sound information. So that's a little bit about how she works, and you'll see that percolating through the talk that we have. So Michelle's a business partner at EM Solutions together with myself, and together we offer a yin and yang service about conformity and wild ideas, and we are approached by a number of people globally to reposition and firm up their strategy. All right, Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, so this is what we've done so far. Like Bruce said, we've had a couple of webinars once a month, and so we've covered the foundation, being your purpose, what is the problem that you're solving, who are the people that you're engaging with, and how does your program, which is your product, meet those people and solve their problem. Then we started looking at the more strategic level that addresses those issues, being your vision. What is it that you stand for? How do you outwork what you are wanting to achieve? And then last month we started talking about funding, and we spoke in a broad perspective around funding. And then today we're going to sort of bring it all down to look at individual funding categories and funding groups, your donors. So this was just a little recap of last month, because it is so much of a part 2 today, following on from part 1, which was last month, where we talked about developing a funding strategy. And the funding strategy is a thought through. That for us is very important, and I think we need to sort of tattoo onto our forehead something about strategic thinking. It's all about the thinking, and I'm not sure if it was clear enough last month, and hopefully it'll be clear enough this month. It's about being proactive when it comes to funding, and you can't be proactive unless you have thought it through and got a clear picture in your mind of what it is you're wanting to achieve, and then clearly communicate to those people who need to know what it is that you are wanting to do moving forward. It's far too much of a reactive scenario when we start talking about fundraising. So we want to get out of that mindset and make sure that you are thinking and dreaming and planning and getting the whole idea in your head, and then saying, right, okay, now what is the action plan? So the funding strategy, your document should contain information about the income sources that represent who you are and that align with your values and political ideology as much as with your programs. So we talked about who you don't want funding from, and being very clear when you are looking at the available funders, which ones align with what you do. So obviously donors won't grant to you if you don't align with their objectives in terms of program things. We're an educational funder, or we're an advocacy funder, or, you know, those kind of things. But it's also around how you work and who you are and what you believe in. We talk a little bit later on about government departments. Now, there's certain organizations whose whole ethos is around challenging the status quo, challenging the human rights violations that are codified into our laws. And so it doesn't make sense for them to be funded by government departments because there's an ideological disconnect. And these are the type of organizations who are challenging the government and how things are run, and a very necessary part of our society. So your funding strategy does definitely need to make sure that there is a connection between who you are pursuing in terms of funding as it aligns with who you are as an organization. We also spoke about the two parts to funding. The first is awareness, making people aware of your organization. Doing the website, the Facebook page, the brochures, publishing in articles, whatever it is, being on the panel at the conferences, depending on your organization and what it is that you do and who you're trying to attract, there are different activities that you would do that become a fundraising, an awareness raising activity. I frequently start work with a client and say, we're doing the budget in the beginning of the relationship, and I put in there a line for the AGM, the annual report in the AGM is part of promotional activities. And at least 75% of these new clients say to me, we don't have an AGM. And I say, well, it is your biggest awareness raising event, because it's all about you. It's an opportunity to invite your beneficiaries, as well as your donors, as well as other people who are interested in your organization, and to just blow your own horn and present your annual report and say how wonderful you are. And it's an annual thing, and you have to have a meeting anyway. Why not make it into an event? Why not make it part of that marketing that you do as an organization? So that's the one aspect. And then the other aspect that we're going to focus more on today is the relationship development activities. How are you connecting with potential donors? What are the things that you are doing to say, you have the funds or the goods or the resources that I need. We have the programs and the passions and the score points that you need. How can we build this relationship together? How can we partner together? How can we actually meet each other's needs and build into a longer term relationship? And I think that for me is quite important, that you understand this, to these donor engagements to be a relationship, because I see so often on Facebook pages and things like that where people are saying, I've been in operation for 5 years and I've never been funded. Can you please fund me? And I'm like, well, why should I? There's, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about you. I have no relationship. And so there has to be some effort on your part to build that relationship, because that's when you get the multi-year continuous funding, because there is that, that connection, that deeper level that goes beyond just a transactional value. Okay, so that's a little bit of a recap on what we did last month, and just the things that I wanted to emphasize from last month and bring into this week to just kind of get you focused on what it is we're trying to achieve when it comes to our fundraising efforts. So we're going to look at a number of categories. I'm going to actually go on to the next slide, and then Bruce will be able to pull up the poll for us. But, oopsie. These are sort of categories that I find helpful for us to sort of group donors and income sources. Income sources is a better word because it encompasses these aspects but better. And I would be really interested to find out from you. I'm going to stop the slide share. Let us answer the questions and then have a little bit of a chat. I want to know, where does the bulk of your income come from? And I've given you a possibility of saying which two categories, because you may say, well, it's actually sort of this one and that one. But I would be very interested to see, in terms of your organization, where does the bulk of your income come from? And you should have a poll pop up on your screen. And so it would be really lovely if you could just select those for us, and we can see what which ones make the most for you. Okay, Bruce, you're going to have to tell me how to see the answers. Will you have to put up the answers? You're muted.
I'll show you the answers once we're done. Yeah, so we've got
perfect.
6 out of the 8 people participated. Interesting.
Well, it'd be 7 because you and I wouldn't.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so I think that's it. So I'm going to end poll, and then I'm going to publish the results so you can all see them. There we go.
Wow, that is interesting. Yes. So is everybody able to see the results there? I think just for the recordings, I want to note that we've got 86% in terms of individual donations. 29 is split between fundraising events and foundations, and then 14 between grant-making mechanisms and local government departments. Nothing in sales and nothing in foreign governments. That's an interesting split for me. I was expecting foundations and corporates and maybe some government departments to be a bit higher than the individual donations. But I think based on my knowledge of the organizations we have here, there's a heavy emphasis on individuals. And that is clearly shown in this poll. So does anybody want to comment on that? Does this ring true for you? What's your experience? Maybe we can just chat for 2 minutes. Nobody wants to say anything. Does it make sense to you, the answers that we got?
I think it's a little scary that individuals, because that is where the more volatile funding happens. Because if you look at anybody who's living in the riot area or the looting area from last week, they are not thinking of donating to NPOs. And in the colder weather, people might not want to go out and donate and stuff. So it's very flexible in a bad way, I suppose, to be relying on that. So, yeah, I think there's great opportunity for improvement. My school teacher used to tell me that.
I like Mary's comment there. I'm not ready for foreign governments yet. And I totally agree. Foreign governments are quite a handful. Their compliance requirements are horrendous. So it is definitely a scary one to cross into. Yes. And I understand, Bruce, what you're saying about the volatility of individuals, and I totally agree. The benefit of individuals, though, is if you lose 1 or 2, it doesn't sort of derail you entirely. Whereas if you have bigger grant agreements, 1 or 2, it could be your entire budget. Yeah. So I think what is also standing out for me is the limited level of diversity within those polls, that poll, and how the diversity is really what it makes you sustainable, because you're not then dependent on any particular sector that can derail things if they reduce. Great. All right, so let me put the slide share back on again. Gotta make sure I share the right page. Okay, there we go. So the last time, and I just wanted to refresh this a little bit, this is where we're going to deep dive now this month, is into the individual income source segments. And for each segment, we need to really understand our avatars, our generic representative of that segment. What are they looking for? Who are they? What are they about? So I'm going to touch base a little bit on what they're looking for and kind of who they are in that sense. But really, there's a much deeper perspective that you can bring to this particular donors within your individual income source segments. And those are the things we're looking at. Like, where are they based? What is the location? Are they community focused, or are they global focused? Are they, in the global north or the global south, which also impacts how they perceive you in your programs and what it is they're trying to achieve. What is their culture and their ideology? And that definitely speaks to the previous part where I was saying it needs to align with what you do and your passion and your mission. What is it that they're really interested in? So it might be, for example, I'm kind of sort of just making this up as I'm speaking, that their overarching mission is the end of inequality. But for that, they have focused on food security and potentially employment. And so they are looking at, and healthcare, so they're looking at poverty equality, economic equality, and they're looking at health equality. And so they've got various different groups, and you might fit into the, say, the food security aspect because you have an agricultural program or a food education program of some kind. So that's why you're engaging with them. But their overarching mission is around ending inequality. And so communicating in a way that speaks to their mission, speaks to their passion and their broader arching things really helps you to build that relationship. And so that's also why we're excited about next month's talking about message and how do we communicate? How do we tell that story? How do we tell the story that connects to their passion? Okay, I'm getting too excited about next month, and let's focus on where we are now. So it's also, what does they get from the relationship? We like to say that, relationships are not transactional. But everybody there's a benefit for everybody in each relationship. And it might be different for each party involved in the same relationship. Where do their decision-making sit? Is it an individual? Is it a foundation run by an individual who personally chooses the organizations? Or is it a board? Is it a broader decision-making mechanism, which then requires that you meet all the steps and jump through all the hoops? Where can we find them? Are they going to conferences? Do they participate in global settings? Is it just merely at municipal offices? Where is it that we find them locally, globally, in a broader scheme of things? Types of donations. Maybe we're talking about corporates and small businesses. Is their type of donation more geared towards a donation in kind rather than a monetary donation? Maybe it's a donation of services. Are we talking about things like an audit firm where they will donate their audit pro bono or legal services? What is the kind of thing that you would expect to get from that particular group in that income source? And also average donation value. As we saw with the individuals, there's a high percentage within this group that we're talking to today, but the value of an individual donation is typically quite small. You might get those high net worth ones who will give you a lump sum at the end of the year to reduce their tax burden, but for the most part, it's a small amount on an ongoing basis. So you need a cumulative amount in order to make it worthwhile, as opposed to those types of income sources where one grant will cover you for the year or a few years and make it much more worth your while. So there is also just going back to the relationship aspect, the individuals require quite a lot of maintaining, and so it can be quite time intensive. Whereas, as Mary mentioned, with the government departments, there's a compliance issue there. So that's time intensive in a different way. But others can be very easy. So those are the things that also need to be considered in terms of your resources and your capacity. Which are the donor sources that make the most sense for you as an organization? Okay, so let's just get into the individual donor categories and have a look at what they are looking for. How do we communicate with them? What is their priorities? What is that we're looking at? And what needs to be included in that message? So I think what I also want to just put up front before we go into the individuals is about the message. So I also see a lot on Facebook where people say, can you give me an example of a donor letter? I want to send a donor letter, I need funding, I need somebody to write it for me. And the expectation is that they will have one letter and they will send it to everybody that they want to ask funding from. I can tell you right now that's not going to work. It'll work 10% of the time, because out of the 10 people they speak to, one will actually connect with the letter, because the letter will have been drafted with that kind of organization in mind, kind of income source in mind. So what we're really saying here is fundraising has to be customized, it has to be personalized, it has to be targeted. And so what I want you to go through here is to see, how do you target that? What are you looking at? What is it that they are interested in? So in terms of multilateral grant making mechanisms, so we're talking the big donors, the HIVOSs, the CDC, there's a whole lot of the really international ones who their focus is global and it's on the global objectives. So maybe it is in the sustainability development goals, maybe it is in the environmental goals, those ones that are set by the EU and the UN, and those really big overarching goals that we refer to in acronyms, the health goals and so forth. So they're looking at those global objectives and how do they change that? How do they meet those objectives through the work that the organizations that they partner with do? Their issues are systemic and socio-political issues. So they're not looking at the hungry children in your community. They're looking at, why are those children hungry? What is the systemic problem within the government structure that results in those children being hungry? How do we engage with systemic change? And how do we really look at the bigger issues that are surrounding our world? I mean, one of the organizations that I know have recently started a COVID vaccine department because they've realized that there is inequality in the rollout of the vaccines and the way the whole COVID vaccine story has been implemented. And so that's now a larger systemic problem between governments and countries and on a global stage. And that's what that department engages with. They're not interested in if you and your auntie have been vaccinated. All right, so I'm taking a long time to talk about the first point, but I hope you get what I'm saying. And with that, they also are looking at impact. How does this provide us with sustainable change? Not, are we going to continuously feed the hungry children every single day, which requires a continuous input and a continuous thing. They're wanting to give their funds into those things that will result in a change in legislation, a change in ways of working, a change in perspectives that result in sustainable long-term change. And that it is scalable. So you might have a program or a way of working which you can present to them as a pilot, that they start with that, but then it is scalable. See if it works, see if it makes the change we want, see if it has the impact, and then how do we scale it up? How do we roll it out into not just one country, but in 14 countries? And so it's country level kind of interventions rather than community level. And for me, the other important one is re-saleability. So because these grant-making mechanisms are non-profit organizations in and of themselves, they also have to raise funds. Sometimes they get money from the foreign governments, and so often can be a consortium that is receiving funding from a particular government, or it might be from other grant-making mechanisms. They have to convince the next level up from them to give them money. And they do that off the back of your programs. So they say, we've got this pilot that this organization in South Africa is implementing. It has shown this huge impact. It is creating this sustainable change. Therefore, can we get another 3 years of funding that then gets dispersed onto that organization in South Africa? So they get their fees and their coordination and all that kind of thing out of the money that they give to us. They do very little tangible work themselves. Most of it is through their partner organization. So the way you present it has to be something that they can then go back to their back donors and say, this is really good. We need you to fund that. We need you to do that. And Bruce and I have seen that on a small scale with the organizations we've been working with who are funded by a Dutch nonprofit organization, where we've been helping those organizations to craft the wording and the language and the business plans and the strategy documents so that the Dutch donor can go back to their back donor and appeal for funds for their income generating activities. Okay, so it's got to be saleable. You've got to present it in such a way. They don't really work with the end beneficiary, but rather work with the organizations and the systems that will create that movement towards change. The same, I think, applies to some degrees with foreign governments. There's also that global objectives in there, but that it's tempered by the political considerations. So it has to be in line with that particular government's mandate and that particular government's stand on things. So there were some significant changes that were made when Trump was president in America in terms of the Republicans, I can say possibly just his, but the Republican standpoint on things like healthcare and abortion and refugees and so forth, which had impact on those programs who receive funding from the US government. There were some things that they had to agree on the way that they would work, and certain programs that had previously had funding no longer receive funding because they didn't align with the government's objectives. So there's political considerations. And what is quite nice about having this level of multilateral grant making is that sometimes they're in conflict's too strong a word, but in opposition to the foreign governments themselves and saying, look, this is not okay. These things are, the civil rights and the civil liberties are being infringed by these governments, and how do we make that change? They also want to see impact, the foreign governments. They're counting numbers. So they're wanting to see that scale. They're wanting to be able to say, okay, we've seen this change happen. And it's also, I think, when they're funding into the northern hemisphere is funding into the southern hemisphere typically, they're not wanting it to be a lifelong investment. They realize that they're supporting the foreign government's social agenda, but there comes a point where that foreign government needs to actually hold its own. And we've seen this with Denmark and Norway. I'm thinking it's about 10, 15 years ago that both of those countries said, look, South Africa, you've been in post-apartheid for long enough now, your government needs to pick up the social slack. And they both withdrew entirely from the country. And so that is a situation as well. There's political considerations there when it comes to foreign governments. And that accountability level on, because they're accounting for the taxman's money. That's where the foreign governments get their money. It's tax money. So it has to be accounted back to their citizens, and that there has to be some good systems in place in your organization to be able to handle that level of money. Okay. So the next one is local government departments. I think I want to sort of tack on to local government departments the sort of parastatals and the government affiliated entities. So lotteries and National Youth Development Fund and those kind of things. To me, they're all part of the same bundle because they operate the same way. They're limited by their national spend. There's an allocation of funds and that's it. And by the focus of the government at the time. So there might be a higher priority around certain things, and that's where the funding will go. We certainly saw that in terms of lotteries or Department of Social Development last year, where there was a huge shift towards COVID-related activities for grants that they dispersed during in 2020, as well as towards poverty alleviation and food security and just making sure people were fed, and that that was their primary focus, rather than on the longer term health considerations and unemployment, which is often a focus of local government departments. They also look at grassroots rather than that systemic systemic change. They're looking at community. The type of work supports the citizenry. So they're rolling out the mandate of government, and so they're focused on South Africans and how South Africans engage with the world and live in the country and are secure and have our needs met. So they're very much focused on the end beneficiary and who that is and how that interacts with them. And then they're looking also at the geographic spread. So for you as an organization, it's great, they'll fund lots of little organizations, but at the same time it is beneficial if you can be one organization that works in multiple geographic locations, because for them it's then efficient to fund for you, and then you meet those regions and the areas around a larger spread for them in terms of their managing the grants. Foundations, so this is very much around a person and a personal passion, or it might be a family. It's set up by either a company, sometimes like DG Murray Foundation, set up by DG Murray, the company. Then you've got like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, set up by them as a couple. You've got all of these I think there's, what's the major Warren, somebody or other who does all the investments things. He's also got, so there's all these things that are focused on somebody who has lots of money, puts aside the money, and then directs it towards things that they are passionate about. So it can swing. Often their fund will be set up for a particular thing, and then when the money is finished on that thing, then there is no more money. But if it's something like attached to a corporate where there's a continuous source of income, then they can have periods of this 3 years we focus on this thing, and then another 3 years we focus on that thing. But it is always this, it's connected to a passion and to a personal story. So they like the personal stories. They like seeing how that thing that they're interested in has been impacted and has been improved. They're also into longer term impact typically, rather than continuously giving, because they have typically a limited fund. The Gates Foundation is a conglomerate of high net worth American individuals, so there are annual contributions and that continues to grow. But I'm trying to think of the name of the guy. Last year, the fund was set up 10 years ago, the money finished, and they closed the organization. That was the intention right from the beginning. Here is the pool. Once that money's gone, the money's gone. And that was it. So often there is a limit when it comes to a foundation. And so they're looking to see how can they impact those individuals on a longer term basis. How are you set up? So there is a focus on the organization and the sustainability of the organization, because they realize that they can give you money for, say, 3 years, but they really want to see those kids fed for the next 10. So how do they help you be more sustainable? And that's often a key thing. So you'll find that those types of organizations are the ones who will give you core funding, or will give you a lump sum towards a building or towards an investment of some kind. They're often the ones who, at the end of their grant period, will give you a lump sum for your reserves. So because they're understanding of the need for the organization, because of the impact that you're having and how that can outlive them and their money. Okay. Right, then corporate CSI and small businesses. So this typically aligns to their supply chain or the interests of their leadership. So in some cases, they might start as a separate foundation, but there is a mandate that aligns to what they're trying to do. We found also that there is an emphasis on the community and the upliftment of the community within which they operate. So, and this is a little bit of a generalization. So for example, there was a wind farm company that we worked with where they were setting up a wind farm, and part of their requirements to utilize the land was they had to uplift the community within where they were situated. So either it's a direct relationship to where they are, or it's somewhere that makes sense in terms of their longer term supply chain, or the way that they are benefiting the community, or the way that they see themselves having an impact. So Outsurance, for example, they love sending staff to do projects, and they do painting, and they do buildings, and they do those sort of tangible things, rather than giving on an ongoing basis for something that, for advocacy, for example, something that's not visual. They want to see that photo opportunity. They want to have that utilize their giving to promote their company. And I think that is a key thing. It's said with a benevolent and philanthropic intent, but there's always an underlying opportunity for them to leverage what they are doing for their own benefit as a corporate. And that's not wrong in any way, shape or form, and it's definitely not something we should be huff and puff about. It's something we should leverage. We can say, well, this is how you can benefit from supporting us as an organization. Are you a supplier to them? How can you be a supplier to them? How can you assist them in leveraging their BBEEE, all the B's and all the E's scorecard? Is there a way that then benefits them? There is a win-win. Can they use it as a promotional opportunity? Golf day t-shirts, and there's the stories as well. Let's send them the stories so they can put it on their website, and they can say what a wonderful company they are because they've done X, Y, and Z, and we try and get as much out of that as we can. So there's definitely a way that you're approaching corporates that is, as you can see immediately here, very different from the ones that we have talked about previously. And then the individuals, and since most of you have got significant funding from individuals, I think I'm preaching to the choir here, it's a personal connection, and it has to be relatable, and you tug their heartstrings. That's really what it is. There's an emotional thing, and the personal connection can be multifaceted. So mothers will give to activities that relate to kids because they can identify with that, they can relate to that. So there's a connection to what it is that you're doing and the beneficiary that you're wanting funding for. Dog lovers will support the SPCAs and things like that. But there's also another level of connection where I know somebody who gives, where there's that referral aspect. Somebody's saying, well, I need to get rid of money because of my tax, reduce my tax, or I'd like to give, I want to connect to something. Where do I do it? Who do I speak to? I actually had that one in this morning's on Facebook on my home community group, Facebook group. Somebody's kids wanted to make sandwiches for the homeless, and she posted and said, where can I drop that off? Where is it something that's in our community that somebody does that? And a whole lot of people had comments. So there's a reference there. There's somebody knows somebody. And then the last type of connection is that community. So either I know somebody who lives there, I live there, somebody who I've connected with in some way is impacted. So there's that personal connection with the beneficiary in the program. There is the personal relationship with somebody who already gives, and the connection in terms of the community. And so awareness of that means that the way you tell the stories, the way that you communicate, who you're addressing really connects with that personal connection. Very beneficiary focused. They're not particularly interested in the systemic change to ensure people's human rights. It's too distant from the personal. It's who is the individual person or animal that is being affected. And then the next one is convenience. I think, Bruce, you made some comment about dropping off and traveling too far and things like that. Absolutely. If you've got to make it easy. So, that's why it's local. That's why it's community. Are you collecting donations of goods? Do you have easy payment mechanisms? How easy is it for somebody to pay? If they've got to jump through too many hoops, they're going to give up and get their busy lives. It's not something that they're passionate about following through with if you don't make it convenient. And it also needs to have meaning, that I personally made a difference. So that thank you and the story and the touch base is very important and incredibly time consuming, especially if you have a large individual donor base. But that's what makes them give again, and that repeat is because I feel like I've made a difference. I've actually had an impact in somebody's life. It's absolutely hugely motivating and needs to be considered. Right, okay, last two very quickly in the last five minutes, and then we can do our little close. So fundraising events. So this is really where you're attracting a range of income sources. So you might have some corporate donors, you might have some representatives, you might have some individuals, but I kind of want to have it as a separate category because it is a different mindset. As opposed to looking for an ongoing income source. These are particular events, and you need to make sure that the type of event aligns with the type of people you're trying to attract. So if you have a golf day, you're going to get people who play golf or people who've wanted to play golf. And there's a very specific socioeconomic category of people who fit into the golf players. And that might be your target market. That's great. Then have a golf day. But if you're going to have let's all go and paint the classrooms in the school around the corner and make that as a sort of a fundraising event and get people together, that's going to attract a totally different crowd. So make sure that your people are aligned with the type of event that you are wanting to do. Also, people who attend events do so because of either an invitation that they've seen on a personal invitation, but most often it's a personal connection. So somebody else I know is coming to your event, I will come, or I came last year and I'll come again this year, or somebody I know has specifically invited me. You're not going to just get the general public rocking up. because they saw a post on Facebook. That it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen to people who've booked for something that they are invited to. They still don't come. So the likelihood of you having that without that tangible engagement, that relationship building. Okay. And there needs to be a benefit from the event for them. What is it that they get out of it? Maybe in it, and this needs to be explicit, it's just the feel good. Let's all go paint the school together and we'll feel good about it. But there's more to it than that. There's relationships and there's connection, and you can meet new people and we can have a fun day out. And so when you're communicating it and advertising it, emphasizing what they will get from the event will inspire and motivate people to participate. What is it that they're looking for? Maybe it's an auction that you're going to hold. They're clearly going to get some tangible auction items. Advertise what those are so that people then will come because they want that auction item. And so the benefit is there. They don't just come to hear about your organization. And then the last one is sales or income generation. And this really is looking at who your customer is. And now we see the language change and we start using the language of customers and marketing, understanding who buys your product, why do they buy the product, where do they come from, all those questions that we had at the beginning around that income source, you need to be very clear on for your customer. What is it that attracts them to your product? There needs to be that desire for your product. What is it that the benefit that they gain from that product? How is it designed? How does it meet their need? And it is definitely a transactional thing. They're not interested in your mission. They might be, but the primary purpose is the product that they're receiving and how that benefits them, rather than the broader purpose. However, they choose to buy it from you as opposed to from somebody else who sells it because of that broader meaning and that personal values. And so they say, I'm going to support local business. I'll buy from these people. I want to, one of our clients is works with ex-offenders and does a workplace preparedness and workplace training and so on and so forth. They have a cafe and they sell, Mary knows them well. So people go to that cafe particularly because of the broader purpose of the organization, whereas they could go to any cafe and get their coffee. Although they have good coffee, so you're gaining something from it. But the reason that people choose to go that extra little distance or to focus on that cafe and to buy their coffee there is because of the broader purpose. So communicating that in your sales, and how do you connect people who are interested in your product to the broader picture. Okay, so that gives us a little insight. Let me just then wrap up on the last two things of how you can connect with us, and then we maybe have time for 5 minutes of questions. So we have a funding strategy template where it's actually expanded now to a guide. It's a guide on developing a funding strategy. And so we normally sell that for about $750, and we're selling it for $500 for those people who are part of this webinar. And so connect with us if you're interested in that. There's space for you to fill things in, and it's really meant to prompt your thinking. And come back to that. It's thinking. How are you thinking through those things that you need to have a clear picture? Also, we can assist you if you need us to facilitate any of these kind of discussions as a team, taking it back, agreeing it, talking things through, having that kind of chat with the team. So as most of you know, we provide sustainable strategy design. Our focus is on facilitating that conversation, the strategic conversation, and developing your strategic plan, talking through strategy with you and your team. And then our other service offering for nonprofits is the income generation strategy, where we look at all of you who said 0 to the sales in the poll. Why and why not? Let's see if you know, starting a business is a way of you diversifying your income. This is definitely something that we can help with, whether it be just to see what is the best for you, or whether you buy one of our existing off-the-shelf business options. So the very last slide is how to connect with us, requesting a meeting, requesting that survey, the strategy template, join our Facebook group, sign up, and then next month we have our webinar.
Stay warm, stay safe, and stay away from trouble. We will see you in the future. Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle, for your wisdom. Cheerio, everyone. Have a good week further.